Jumping into Hawaii at UCLA. UCLA ended up closing as a 17 or an 18-point favorite. Absolutely cruised in this one. 44-10 was the final. The thing that was most dominant for UCLA was their rushing attack. Britton Brown got the start. He finished with 13 carries, 78 yards, and a touchdown. And he was spelled by the talented five-star transfer from Michigan, Zach Charbonnet, who had 6 carries, 106 yards, and 3 touchdowns. So an absolute explosion by Charbonnet. He ran well. I think one of the knocks on him had been he didn't always have great wiggle and didn't show the ability to create for himself. And while he certainly had some wide open running lanes, and that he did, he just, from the eye test standpoint, he looked like his hips are moving a little bit better. And he looks to be settled in nicely in this UCLA offense. Yes, it was Hawaii. Yes, the offensive line dominated. But this is an offense that has some creative run concepts and a coach that will pound it until a team stops it. So between those two, they didn't even have 20 carries, and they almost had 200 total rushing yards and 4 touchdowns. They both got shut down really early. They didn't need to rely on either of them. The good news about that is we got a little bit more of an extended look on Dorian Thompson-Robinson, the quarterback for UCLA. I believe this is now his 3rd or 4th year starting, similar to Adrian Martinez. He's been around forever. Another guy that a lot of people were hoping would take a big jump. He certainly didn't appear to have taken the jump in this game. Finished 10 of 20 passing for 130 yards and a touchdown, no interceptions. He threw some extremely easy balls, just safety valve throws primarily. Had an opportunity in a sudden change situation on the first drive of the game when Hawaii's punter accidentally kneeled the ball on a bad snap, and he missed a wide open guy for a touchdown on his first ball. Okay, maybe we can chalk that up to nerves a little bit, but finishing 50% passing against this defense and really not completing any balls that were challenging to throw. I would say there was one good ball that he threw, and even that was a little bit of a go ball and could have been picked off. If he throws that same ball against LSU next week and it's Stingley there, it's a good chance Stingley's not going to fall down, and he's picking that off and he's going the other way. So even his good ball had some challenges with it. So going over to Hawaii, this is one of the biggest enigmas of the weekend for me. I've been pretty vocal about feeling excited about this offense with a promising young quarterback in Shaven Cordero and the FBS returning leader in all-purpose yards, Swiss Army knife Calvin Turner Jr. There was a lot of optimism surrounding Turner, who was a former quarterback, getting some snaps at quarterback and doing some creative things with him, and certainly using him in the backfield. I didn't see the totality of this game, but I saw a large portion of it. And everything that I saw, Calvin Turner wasn't lined up in the backfield a single time. And I just think that's a massive mistake. What I'm trying to parse through and trying to determine is this game was 17-0 a couple minutes into the game. Hawaii had a couple of bad turnovers. It was very evident from early on they had no prayer of stopping UCLA's ground game. So did Todd Graham just alter the game plan and decide, hey, we're not going to show anything with Calvin Turner here in terms of being creative, and we're just going to line him up in the slot and have him run a few slants and then just, use him as a decoy and run him off on a few plays and try to hit someone else underneath. But just a really a perplexing game plan. Hawaii really wanted to work the screen game to various guys early, and UCLA was really well coached and over it. They had a defensive lineman pick off a ball and set up maybe, a 10 or a 15-yard score. They had several situations where they had really short fields when they were punching it in. So while the 44 was deceptive because they definitely had some short fields that got them there, in fairness, 44 is probably conservative of what it could have been. They shut down this offense really early, and really it was a dream scenario for them because they didn't have to show anything on offense. And that was one of my concerns with laying the big number with them hosting LSU next week in week 1. It was a dream scenario for them where they really didn't have to show anything on offense, and they definitely didn't. I would say, based on what I've seen with DTR's career and what I saw with his pass catchers here and their ability to separate and do things, I don't feel extremely optimistic. Their stud tight end, Greg Dulcich, only had one catch for 15 yards. Again, I think that was probably strategic. He's going to have that on the first drive next week against LSU. I think he's going to absolutely get peppered with targets because chances are you're not going to have him matched up on either Eli Ricks or Derek Stingley. So I imagine they're just going to try to run him down the seams and try to get matchups on slot corners or safeties. So I imagine Dulcich will definitely get ramped up, but there's not a lot of really quality pass catchers on this team. And I think UCLA is going to struggle to pass on LSU. And I think LSU is going to be mighty content putting their guys on an island, in particular their corners on an island, and loading up and daring UCLA to run the ball against stacked boxes. So that'll be a really interesting chess match. I guess I'm getting a little bit too far ahead of myself, but I mentioned it. If any of your books are still hanging a 68.5 out there for a total with UCLA and LSU, that was a lean for me before the week. And based on what I saw, in particular with UCLA's defense, which really was stifling at times, there were a few breakdowns of communication, but a lot of quality on the defensive line with how they played. They really wreaked havoc and looked good there. I went ahead and took that under 68.5 next week. So that's definitely worth considering if you still have a high 60s total hanging on that game. Overall, I think we still have a lot to learn about both teams. You know, they both kind of went into a shell for various reasons, and this game just kind of turned into a scrimmage feel about halfway through because it was so lopsided. I'll be really curious to see what Hawaii looks like. I mean, they were clearly outmatched in this game. They've got Portland State in week 1. And my question becomes specifically to Calvin Turner and his fantasy value. Well, if you're not going to show anything against UCLA with him, okay, that makes sense. But then do you show something against Portland State? And then if you don't show something against Portland State, do you show something next week against Oregon State? Or when are you saving him for? Are you just trying to win a Mountain West championship and you're going to save him till then? So definitely have a lot of questions there. Definitely feel very concerned relative to a player that I had extremely high optimism for. I think the Hawaii offense is going to look just fine against Portland State. They're just going to be totally outclassed, much in the way this game was for them against UCLA, but they're going to be the ones doing the outclassing. So I think overall we just saw the dominance in the trenches that we often see with a Power 5 and a Group of 5 team. That was clearly evident today. And I think for UCLA, it's going to be a much stiffer test, in particular for their offensive line, which really imposed their will, and their backs were just running over people. Now, there's a chance that LSU hasn't cleaned things up for next week, but I feel pretty confident that things are going to look a lot better for them, and they're going to return more closely to the form that we've come to expect with LSU over the years. Obviously, it's the modern era of football now. We're not going to have any, 2009 Alabama defenses anymore, but I think they're going to play much better. So Hawaii definitely left me confused, overmatched. That played out. How will this offense look moving forward? That's my big question. I think we'll maybe learn a little bit more next week for them and get a look for see how things look against Oregon State the following week. And for UCLA, I think they're going to have their biggest test of the season. And so while I was impressed by a lot of what they did, I do think that a lot of what they did on the ground game could be somewhat negated against a really talented LSU front, albeit one that's unproven to this point, or they certainly didn't perform up to the standard last year. So still leaning towards LSU in that game. I just think the quarterbacking situation for UCLA does not look to be improved. Imagine we see DTR get more involved in the ground. They're definitely going to throw a lot more than 20 times, but I just don't think he's going to be able, with this group of pass catchers, aside from Dulcich or just dump offs to the backs, that they have the quality to really challenge LSU. So definitely still like LSU in that game, but prefer the under. Really looking forward to that game. That's now gone way high up on my list in terms of games I'm looking forward to. I think we'll learn a lot more about both of them after that, but I do think there were some telling things here. And in particular, like I mentioned, the experienced UCLA defense really looked improved, with the understanding and the caveat that, yes, it was Hawaii, and yes, Hawaii looked lost. I will say that they passed the eye test for me, that this looks like a bona fide top 25 level defense that I think they're going to definitely have their hands more full with LSU, but they look solid to me, and I think that they are going to take a big step in regards to that. One other thing that I found interesting about Hawaii before we let this one go, apparently this season Hawaii is operating in a more what a player called an audible driven defense, where they're looking to get the play from the sideline and audible out more than they did last year. And one of their defensive linemen indicated that he thought that there were some breakdowns in communication and just the ability to play fast with some of their players who may not be as experienced, or they may be experienced players, but not necessarily in this scheme, where they felt like that really kind of zapped a lot of what they were trying to do to start the game. So it was going to be a mismatch either way, but UCLA is certainly not going to have the types of holes that we saw them run through in this game. But definitely something to watch with Hawaii, because if they don't get that short up, there are some potent Mountain West offenses that are going to give them trouble as well. Should be a good tune-up game for this weekend. More curious to see beyond the defense, just what the offense looks like, how involved Calvin Turner going to be, and can Chevin Cordero look better? Threw the ball 47 times this game. Don't think we're going to see that again. But he definitely, aside from Turner, doesn't have any pass catchers that appear to be dynamic. And at the pure running back position, Day Hunter is a player that I've talked about, I think, last year when he was a true freshman in Dynasty, and put him on a couple of my rosters in their succession plan. But he really didn't appear to be all that dynamic to me. I don't know why you would even remotely consider making him the focal point of the offense when you have Calvin Turner right there. One other quick thing on Turner. He was injured in the game, looked it up on Twitter, and appears that it was just cramping, but definitely something to monitor on that one as well. But from a pass catching standpoint, not a whole lot to be excited on pure receivers on either of these teams from a fantasy standpoint. Britton Brown and Zach Charbonnet appear that they both could have some value, where I still think Britton Brown will be the primary, out-touched Charbonnet about 2-1. That may end up being closer to 50-50 by season's end, but I'd still be more comfortable relying on Brown than I would Charbonnet, even though Charbonnet's numbers and his pedigree jump off the tape a little bit more than Brown's. So that's it for this one.